I think I speak for most people when I say that Season 11 was a very unpleasant experience, at least in ranked solo queue, and many of us were excited to see what Riot would do to make things better for the following year, or maybe we're just in such a desperate state that anything is better than Season 11, and now we're in Preseason 12. During the span of January to November while the season is underway, the only things that are introduced or altered from patch to patch are balance changes, maybe a new champion or rework, and occasionally a systems change, though usually not of too great a scale so as to cause an upheaval of the game state's fundamentals. That's what the preseason update is for, where large clusters of content are added and or reworked to add a new refreshing spin on League of Legends as we know it. Preseason is a time where many of us, yes, even the hardcore players, like to unwind and try some different things. New items, new champions, and overall take the game not as seriously as we do in the season, and that's sort of what I've been doing for the most part. Today, I want to spend some time discussing my thoughts on Preseason 12, whether the new stuff and changes they're adding will make for a more pleasant experience going forward, or if they might lead Season 12 down an even more tumultuous path. Before we do though, I think it's important to establish a bit of history so we have something to compare it to. As I've said, the preseason is where the most amount of changes and things happen to the game, so there's no exact floor or ceiling on what the size of those changes can be. Season 6 featured the Marksman update reworking a lot of AD carries into the champions we know and love today. Love is a strong word. There was also the introduction of a lot of new items to the game that sort of laid the framework for how Marksman would play for the coming years. The mastery system was condensed and simplified, giving us keystones like Thunderlord's Decree, Fervor of Battle, and Courage of the Colossus. Season 7 featured a total overhaul of the stealth mechanic, as well as the Assassin update, performing a lot of the same sort of quality of life adjustments and changes to Assassins like they did with Marksman the year before. On top of that, there was the removal of flat armor penetration, instead replaced with lethality, which was essentially armor penetration that scaled based on level. Planks were also added to the game, which at first were seen as a complete joke, but honestly, I think they were an awesome addition. Blast Cone and Scryer's Bloom especially add a whole new layer of macro tactics for many champions. Season 8 oversaw the removal of runes and masteries, culminating them into the Runes Reforged system which we still have today. There was also the inclusion of Stopwatch, which was pretty fun. Apart from that though, there wasn't really much else besides updating everyone's base stats and numbers to make up for the loss in rune pages. There were big changes, but as far as the list goes, it wasn't that long. Season 9 didn't really do that much either if I remember. The only thing I can think of that changed the game a lot were tower plates, a couple minion and jungle changes, bounties, and that's really about it. It was mostly behind the scenes stuff and no big system introduction. Season 10, however, put in some cool new stuff like the alcoves, which, I mean, in the grand scheme of things don't change too much, but in the early game you can definitely pull off some jukes or outplay your opponent using them. A few items and runes were added, removed, and tweaked, but the real highlight of that preseason was the Elemental Rift, completely transforming the jungle for the rest of the game and adding Dragon Souls based on the third dragon, a permanent buff given to whichever team can take down 4 dragons first, and was effectively the deciding factor for a lot of games. I would argue of the 5 preseasons I talked about so far, Preseason 10 changed the most amount of things, at least until Preseason 11. In Season 11, of course, we witnessed the item system overhaul, bringing forth the new classification of items known as mythics. I'm sure I don't need to explain what that entailed for the entire year. So, where does Preseason 12 stand in all of this? Right in the middle. The changes were big enough to where they'll definitely shake things up in the coming year, but nothing that would fundamentally alter how we've played the last year, which may or may not be a good thing. So while I personally love the mythic item system, I'd be lying if I said it was flawless. Mages and tanks definitely got the short end of the stick when it came to itemization, as even though they received a whole bunch of new ones, they didn't exactly cater towards their target demographic all too well. In contrast, fighters, slayers, and marksmen had a field day this past year, and what a field day. I have never seen such a skirmisher heavy meta in all my years of playing the game, and I also have never seen such a meta where mages were almost invariably the worst class too. On a more positive note though, after what felt like an eternity, marksmen were in a good spot in the metagame thanks to their items finally being decent. Anyways, mages and tanks have gotten some new items and changes to their existing ones with the hope that they will now be on the same level playing field as everyone else. For the big changes, we have 2 new dragons, Hextech and Chemtech Drakes. Hextech dragons grant 5 ability haste and 5% attack speed per stack, while Chemtech Drakes give you 5% more damage against targets with more current health than you. Or in other words, the lower your health is, the more damage you do in a comeback mechanic sort of fashion. As for the elemental rifts that accompany these two, oh boy. The Hextech Rift now includes portals that let you essentially fast travel from one spot on the map to the other, just like how Rek'Sai does with their tunnels. The Hextech Dragon Soul causes you to deal chain lightning damage and apply a slow to multiple enemies, so basically it's an Infernal Dragon Soul with less damage, but more range and a slow. Even considering the quirky and weird nature of the Hextech gates, I don't actually consider the Elemental Rift or the Dragon Soul to be the selling point of this dragon. The buff is 5 ability haste and 5% attack speed per stack may not seem like much, but unless you're playing a champion who rushes 80 ability haste, free cooldown reduction is a powerful stat to give to your entire team, probably more so than 4% bonus AD or AP. The Chemtech Rift covers the 4 jungle points that camouflage any champion within it, while making them deal up to 10% more damage to enemies with more current health than them. So even if you don't have a Chemtech Drake, you'll still get her buff within those zones. As I'm sure you're all aware by now, stealth, regardless of if it's invisibility or camouflage, is a very disliked mechanic among the League of Legends community, because if you can't see your target, you can't attack them unless you're using skill shots. The Chemtech Soul, on the other hand, turns everyone into Scion after dying, which honestly might be the coolest Dragon Soul of the 6. One thing I'm personally not a fan of about Dragon Souls is that they all come down to free stats like more damage, more health, more regen, more movement speed. A temporary revive passive has a lot more fun to it. I mean, yes, to an extent it also is free stats, but if you've gone up against Scion once or twice, you would know the value isn't exactly consistent. There might be someone who manages to 1v5 pentakill while in zombie mode, and someone who dies, respawns, and then instantly dies again. I know not every Dragon Soul can do something like that, but as probably an unpopular opinion, I think the Chemtech Soul is the coolest soul in the game. It changes how you have to play teamfights or skirmishes rather than, oh, the enemy team is stronger. First Strike was added alongside Glacial Augment and Lethal Tempo's rework, but I'm making a video on those in more detail later, so stay tuned for that. It's safe to say that Preseason 12 was a continuation or an expansion of Seasons 11 and 10. Not a bad thing per se, you don't have to implement crazy things every year. In fact, I appreciate that Riot didn't do a whole lot this year because they already did that last year, and it's probably best to spend a season trying to fix what's broken or change what's wrong, which leads me to a burning question I've had on my mind since patch 11.23 came out. What was the point of Hextech and Chemtech Dragon? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you shouldn't add new content for new content's sake, but the main premise of Preseason is to update or fix what is not doing well before. From what I could gather, that was the philosophy for the previous years. 2015 to 2017 was responsible for a massive wave of champion adjustments due to the game aging poorly. A lot of assassins, mages, tanks, and marksmen were a product of old game design and lacked a clear identity. That was the motivation for those preseasons. Season 8 condensed runes and masteries into one system because it was too cluttered, overcomplicated, and the masteries didn't really do anything other than give you more stats. There are still runes that give you more stats and combat pressure like Legend Alacrity, Tenacity, and Bloodline, but also other things that can help your champion in more unique ways like Futurist Market, Zombie Ward, Demolish. Demolish was a fantastic quality of life rune for tanks. And of course, you know, the entire rest of the inspiration tree. Dragons were also running a little stale because they were just plain stat boosters. Impactful stat boosters, but in the end just stat boosters. So Riot wanted to add a bit more flair to the existing dragons by creating Elemental Rifts and Dragon Souls in Season 10. Now, dragons are a core part of the mid to late game and not just something you take when you have nothing better to do. What it did was put a greater focus on objective control in League of Legends. The item system along with the existing selection was in dire need of updates, so they did a full retrofit for just about every single item in the game. Each preseason update addressed the problem and went on to fix it, or at least they tried to. Initially, most of this preseason's patch echoed that same sentiment. Tanks and mages needed a touch-up and they got them. Lethal Tempo and Glacial Augment were two of the most inconsistent and underperforming runes, so they fixed them. And snowballing was out of control this season. You play in high elo, get triple kill a Skull Crab, you might as well give up at that point. So they added objective bounties, which are not half bad I might add. They don't invalidate the winning team's lead, but it presents some way for the losing team to get back into the game, especially the turret bounties. Once again, we have a legitimate incentive to split push, so Riot is at least conscious of the need for alternative win conditions. But there's still an entire Bible's length of problems left on the table. Nothing to tackle griefing, win trading, or soft inting. What of the overabundance of players getting autofilled? Why is there still a huge disparity between the weakest champions and the strongest, the overloaded champions? 2 runes were fixed and 1 was added, but there are still a good 10 or so runes that are always picked over the others. Of all the things to add to or fix in the game, why 2 new dragons? What was wrong with the existing 4? Well, besides Cloud Drake, but Cloud Drake was always like that. To reiterate, I do enjoy what the new dragons bring to the table, and I think they can shake things up a bit for the next season. But if I had to choose between adding those and responding to all the damage caused by Season 11, I would 100% choose the latter. When they released the LOL Please video on Preseason 12 and the state of the game, the reception was awful. The like-dislike ratio was 1 to 3. You can't see the dislikes anymore, but trust me when I say it was pretty bad. The video revealed just how out of touch with the community the League team was. But it's not the contents of Preseason that disillusioned the player base. Like I said, the entirety of patch 11.23 in a vacuum is nicely done. Eventide is a great support item for engaged tanks, Winter's Approach is good for all the tanks who want to use mana, Crown of the Shattered Queen finally presents an anti-burst option for mages along with Shadow Flame to deal with shields. The dragons, while not necessary, aren't an unwelcome addition to the game either. What's bothering the player base is that Riot is neglecting all of the options that would really help the game, choosing only to take care of surface level stuff. It's better than nothing, but the new items and dragons won't exactly incentivize the players who are leaving to want to come back. In their defense, addressing issues like toxic behavior or overloaded champions isn't something they can fix in one patch. It will take many months to dig out the festering foundation of the game and renovate it. But this is Preseason, the best time to make drastic changes because there's no pro play, no worlds, no ranked, or at least not an active ranked season. This is exactly the time for the gloves to come off and solve these problems, when the potential collateral damage bears the lowest consequences on the game's already fragile state. I know it sounds like I'm contradicting myself. Earlier I said I appreciate that this preseason update was smaller in scale. But what I'm asking for isn't necessarily more things, it's for more change beyond game content. Improving the quality of life for champions is a step in the right direction. I'm eager to see how objective bounties will influence comebacks when 2022 rolls around. However, with the recent success of Arcane once again fronting Riot Games into the public consciousness, it's absolutely in their best interest to push for a good look on their flagship title, League of Legends. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I don't believe the game needs new stuff, the game needs better stuff, if that makes sense. A preseason patch like this would have worked maybe in Season 6 or 7 when everyone was going nuts about the game, but this patch gives me the same kind of impression as what Nintendo has been doing for Pokemon. Just recently, they released Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, and while the games themselves are objectively fun and enjoyable, in the context of their predecessors and when thinking about what Nintendo is capable of, it could have been so much more than just a DS game ported over to the Switch. With that said, you guys know me, I'm on copium 24/7. I'm still hoping that maybe things will eventually turn around. I like what they did with tanks and mage items, and I'm hoping that the objective bounties and scuttlecraft changes might help the game enough to make Season 12 better, so we'll see how things unfold. Anyways, today's video is going to be a bit shorter, so I hope you're okay with that. Let me know your own impressions on Preseason 12 in the comments down below. Are you optimistic about the next year, or have you still officially lost all faith in League? For now, if you enjoyed, a rating would be much appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more content like this. I have a second channel called Vars 2, where I do discussion content on other games besides League. Currently I only do Genshin Impact, but I plan to explore other games in the future, so it would be awesome if you could support me on both channels. Apart from that, feel free to follow me on Twitter, join my Discord server, and lastly check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for the next video. Take care.